Parvati Thapa is 20 years old and lives in Nepal. She was orphaned as a baby but was able to stay in school and receive an education with the help of a local nonprofit. While Thapa found help, many other Nepalese girls go down a different path.
I have seen my village in my house side, one sister got child marriage.
That sister that Thapa is referring to was married off at 15 years old and shortly after the wedding became pregnant with her first child. The girl's older husband abused her and didn't care about the welfare of her or the newborn.
This sister is commit suicide. Her daughter in another house, work in child labor.
At just 15 years old, imagine being pulled into an abusive marriage and faced with raising a child while living in poverty. Feeling completely isolated and helpless, the girl committed suicide, leaving her daughter to be trafficked into servitude. This narrative is all too common in Nepal. Each year, as many as 20,000 Nepalese girls are tied into child marriages or trafficked into sex work or forced labor. Sara Bakker is the Director of Operations for the American Himalayan Foundation, a nonprofit based out of San Francisco helping people across the Himalaya gain safety, shelter, education, and health care. Since 1998, the foundation has partnered with the Nepali nonprofit Rural Health and Education Services Trust to form the Stop Girl Trafficking Initiative, run locally by Dr. Aruna Upreti.
In the early 90s, Dr. Aruna Upreti, she's our partner in the program, went to India and met with Nepali women who had been trafficked into brothels there, and to try to see what she could do to help them if they wanted to go home, if there was a good rescue plan. And a lot of them at that point had been quite abused and already contracted HIV. The best options for many of them were just kind of to go into shelters. They didn't feel like they could go back to their villages because they'd be exiled. And instead they asked her to go back to the rural villages in Nepal and teach girls about the risks of trafficking. And so that's what she did.
So far, the initiative has helped more than 12,000 girls get an education and stay safe. Currently, another 12,000 girls are enrolled in the program in 500 schools across Nepal.
They help them stay in school or put them in school if they've already dropped out. And they do that by providing all the materials that they need, backpacks, uniforms, school supplies, as well as things like mentoring and tutoring, and this extra layer of education about trafficking, child marriage, child labor, and other issues that women and children face, women's rights, things like that.
Bakker says many of them come from rural parts of the country where poverty runs rampant.
In a rural village in Nepal, there are many families who are barely scraping by, generally subsistence farming, and can't put food on the table. So those become the targets for traffickers. Those traffickers are often either a woman from another village, maybe a man or a woman from another village, who comes and offers them a job in Kathmandu, in India, or somewhere else. And then from there, girls are either sold into domestic servitude in Kathmandu, in India, in Gulf countries, or even further abroad.
Bakker says these traffickers are not who you would typically think of. They are well-organized international networks that work together to exploit those without the means to fight back.
There was a woman in a village who would go to other villages. She'd show up in a helicopter that she rented, dressed up, wearing jewelry, all these very lavish things, and then go talk to girls, go talk to their parents, and tell them she was going to get them a good job, they're going to be making money like me, this whole thing. And it was obviously all just a front to then trick these girls into, and she would pass them off to somebody else, who would pass them off to somebody else, who would pass them off to somebody else. And they ultimately end up in brothels around various parts of India.
And some of these predators even take advantage of the families of the girls they're trafficking.
The other main route is by a handsome stranger coming in and offering marriage. Because that's, again, one less mouth to feed. They're going to have a better life. I'll take you away. And parents often say, yeah, sure, take her. Or the girl says, yeah, okay, I'll come with you, whether it's her choice or her family's choice. And because remittances and international migration has become such a big source of income for so many countries around the world, they're now, instead of giving the family a little bit of money to take their daughter away, are often even making them pay money to get the fake passports, to get the documents. And the family ends up going even further into debt while their daughter gets taken away, never sends home that money that they promised.
Once the girls are taken, they are quickly separated from everything they know in order to be forced into submission.
Women in those situations, having their passports taken away, not knowing the local language, not having any resources to be able to escape, being physically and sexually abused often.
Bakker says slavery was only made illegal in Nepal in 1999. Being so recent, it's still a part of the country's culture, and many trafficked Nepali women ultimately end up in bonded or forced labor where they get stuck in debt.
Most probably go into bonded labor in Nepal, forced labor. That's very, very common. And there is a long history of bonded labor in Nepal, that you go and you work on someone's farm, or you're a subsistence farmer working their land, and then you need to borrow some money for something, and it ultimately becomes this cycle of debt that traps the family.
So what are the Nepali government and local law enforcement doing to fix this problem?
The government has changed policies, and they changed the laws, and they are trying to enforce it. But I think it's the same issue that is happening all over the world, where even if the laws are in place, they aren't always enforced as thoroughly as they could be. Sometimes these actions are underfunded. It's also hard to catch traffickers.
Human trafficking is a global problem. Heather Barr is the acting co-director of the Women's Rights Division of the Human Rights Watch, an international NGO based out of the U.S. Barr researches the prevalence of human trafficking in Myanmar, a Southeast Asian country close to Nepal, which is ranked by the U.S. as one of the worst countries for human trafficking. Many of the girls and women from Myanmar are trafficked into China.
For example, in our research in China, it seemed like the Chinese police would almost never charge families that had bought trafficked women with crimes. They would almost always be ready to accept even the most unbelievable arguments that these families didn't know that these women and girls were trafficked. So these were families sometimes that were keeping these women or girls that they had bought locked in a room in their house for months and sometimes years on end, and then arguing to the police that, they thought that they just paid a bride price and that this woman wanted to be there.
As a researcher, Barr says that how women are treated after they are trafficked feeds into the overall problem.
It's really hard to do research on trafficking because trafficking victims face so much stigma and have experienced so much trauma that it's pretty hard to get them to feel comfortable coming forward and telling their stories. A number of the women we interviewed were actually charged with immigration violations and jailed for days or weeks and then deported rather than being treated as crime victims. And I think that's something that we see across a lot of countries, including Western countries, where trafficking victims are really viewed through this lens of immigration violations rather than being seen as crime victims. And so their stories about being trafficked are not listened to. They have real incentives not to come forward and seek help from the police because it's likely to lead to their deportation and perhaps being charged with crimes as well.
That's why the work of nonprofits and international NGOs is so vital to saving girls before they fall through the cracks.
Our partner, Dr. Aruna Bretty, pioneered the idea in Nepal that education can prevent trafficking. And for her, prevention is key because prevention is rescue without the suffering. You don't have to go that step of trying to rehabilitate someone.
Armed with an education, many of these girls are determined to stop human trafficking. And that starts with redefining how women are viewed.
In some of these families, a daughter is probably considered the least valuable member of your family, just an extra mouth to feed, because when she's married, she'll go live with her husband's family and work for their benefit. There's an old saying in Nepal that educating your daughter is like watering a flower in another man's garden. And I think that's starting to change as more girls are getting educated and they're showing their value. And we've really seen this in the communities where we've been working for quite a while. Many of their parents have also never gone to school or dropped out after first or second grade. So even by the time a girl is in fourth, fifth, sixth grade, she can already help the family in ways that they could never for themselves. She can say, Dad, they're ripping you off at the market where you're going to sell these vegetables, because she can do arithmetic better than they can.
These girls go on to not only help themselves and their families, but future girls who may be in the same situation as they once were.
The graduates from this program are doing really amazing things. So the girls who have gone on, and some of them are married and have children of their own, are forming these community groups or NGOs who some of them are campaigning against child marriage, and some of them are doing programs to help if girls are dropping out of school, getting them back into school. Others are starting businesses where they're helping each other.
To find out more about the Stop Girl Trafficking Initiative, the American Himalayan Foundation, and Human Rights Watch, visit our website at viewpointsradio.org. This segment is written and produced by Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price.
It's back-to-school season, and classrooms often don't come with everything teachers need. The average public school teacher spends $500 each year out of their own pocket for learning materials. One nonprofit is working to change that. DonorsChoose.org founder Charles Best.
My students and I started DonorsChoose.org because we thought people would want to help teachers if they only knew what we needed and could see how their donation would be used.
DonorsChoose.org enables teachers to request classroom resources ranging from books to pencils to field trips. Donors can browse through projects and give to the ones that inspire them. Supplies are shipped directly to the school, and donors receive thank yous from the classroom. Amanda Lennox Hall teaches third grade in Austin, Texas.
DonorsChoose.org has had a tremendous impact on my classroom. We've diversified our library, started a cooking club, and even learned to become beekeepers. We're humbled by all the generous support, often from complete strangers.
You can support a public school teacher today by visiting DonorsChoose.org.
Paid non-attorney spokesperson paid for by the Sentinel Group. Attention military vets and current soldiers who served between 2002 to 2016. Have you or a loved one suffered hearing loss or tinnitus after serving or while serving in the U.S. Armed Forces? You may be entitled to compensation. 3M, the manufacturer of earplugs made for combat, recently paid the government $9.1 million to settle a False Claims Act case for knowingly selling these defective earplugs for over a decade. Specifically, the United States argued that the manufacturer knew their earplugs were too short for proper insertion into users' ears, and that the earplugs could loosen and therefore didn't perform properly or reduce noise the way they should have. If you or a loved one suffered hearing loss or tinnitus after serving or while serving in the U.S. Armed Forces, you need to choose the right legal team that has the experience, support staff, and resources to seek the most compensation for your injuries. Call the Sentinel Group now for more information and a free case review. Call 800-655-6458. 800-655-6458. That's 800-655-6458.
Thank you for listening to Viewpoints Radio, a production of Media Tracks Communications. If you enjoyed this broadcast, please support our show by subscribing, sharing it with a friend, and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can find more Viewpoints stories on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and viewpointsonline.net. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Viewpoints Radio.